So let's now work on getting that database hosting up and running. For this, I searched for MongoDB Atlas, since this will be the managed service we'll be using for the reasons mentioned before. And the great thing about MongoDB Atlas is that you can get started for free. Here, if you go to the pricing page, to the cloud offering, you can get started for free with this shared plan here. And hence we can simply click on try for free here. Though, as always, if you are serious about your website and also your database, therefore, the free plan, of course, has certain restrictions you might not be too happy with in the long term, and therefore you might want to consider upgrading to one of the paid options if you have more traffic and more requests. But to get started, the free plan is great. You don't even need a credit card, as you see here, and therefore now we can enter our email address to create a new account here. Now here I'll quickly fill in my details, and then click Create Account. And this will now create us such a free MongoDB Atlas account. And once that's finished, as a next step, you'll have to verify your account. So that's the next thing you should do. And thereafter, you can sign in with that account you created. Now, initially, you should end up on a starting screen that looks something like this. And here you can now click on Build a Database. Now here we want to go with that rightmost option, the basic option, because that's available for free. And then here stick to basic. Now we can choose the underlying cloud provider, which will be used by MongoDB Atlas. And we can stick to AWS for this. As a side note, you could also directly use AWS. They offer tons of services related to hosting and other services that run on remote machines. But here we'll use MongoDB Atlas, which uses AWS implicitly. And I'll keep all these default settings here. Under clustered here, we want to use the free forever option, the M0 sandbox, which should be the default. We use that database version. We can keep the default cluster name or give it a different name. As a side note, a cluster is in the end the thing that will run your databases later. And therefore then we can click on Create Cluster so that this cluster with the databases is created. And as it says here, this can take a couple of minutes until it's done. Now we don't have to sit here and wait for it though. We can already go to the security area because there we got two things that we need to tweak. First, with the database access. Here, we want to add a new database user because that will be the user with whom we then connect to this database. So this controls the permissions our Node.js application will have when it connects to this database through this user. Now for this, I'll choose password as the authentication method and then add a new user, which I'll name Maximilian or default or whatever you want. And add a password, and I'll choose a fairly insecure one here. You, of course, should probably auto-generate one and then copy that, but here I'll use my own one for this demo. And then here, very important, for the database user privileges, we want to choose read and write to any database. That is what our user should be able to do. Then we can click Add User here. And next we can move on to network access. Here on the network access page, we can control which other servers and machines will be able to connect to our database. And here under IP access list, we want to click on Add IP address. And now we could add our current IP address if we would want to use MongoDB Atlas from our local machine. If we would run the Node Express website on our local machine and that locally running website should connect to MongoDB Atlas. But of course that won't do the trick if our website is running on Heroku's machines, because those machines will have different IP addresses. Therefore, for that, we could either enter the IP address of the server our website will run on if we knew that IP address in advance. But with the basic Heroku deployment option, we don't know that in advance because Heroku will assign IP addresses dynamically. And therefore, I'll choose Allow Access from Anywhere, which means everyone will be able to connect to our database, though that sounds a bit more insecure than it is because you will also need the user credentials, which we set up a couple of minutes ago. So just with that access granted alone, it's not the case that everyone will be able to connect. The user credentials also matter. So here I'll set up this everyone is allowed to send connection requests setting. And with that, we can now wait until our database is done starting up. So once this cluster is done, and once this network access is done configuring, and then we'll be able to continue with deploying our website. So here, that cluster did now start successfully. And now we can click on Connect here to learn how we can connect to it. Now, there are various options, but we want to connect our application, so our website. So we can click on this. And indeed, we are using Node.js, so we can leave that default. And the latest version of that MongoDB driver, which is that MongoDB package which we're using. And therefore, then here, we get the URL which we can use to connect to our database. It has this user which I created automatically filled in. So that will be part of that URL. And we have this password placeholder, which we will have to populate with the user password ourselves. Now that's the URL, which we would now want to use instead of this URL, but keep in mind, we're using environment variables for this. So I will keep this URL here for local development and will provide the production URL. So this URL here through an environment variable after we deployed our website to Heroku. And therefore, I'll keep this window open here, but I'll continue with the deployment steps now, since now we can continue with pushing our code to Heroku and starting our website there.